I called this session with you an architect of the cinematic space. I wondered if you could tell us more about how the memory functions within the cinematic space that you built. Of course, you made many films, but starting from Yom Kippur, going over Anna Arabia, which is one of my favorite films, to the west of the Jordan River, even the Yitzhak Rabin film. Would you tell us more about that? About building the space and different, communicating the memory within this space, because what I found is a lot of spaces within cinematic space that you somehow build.
The main issue, which is both in architecture and cinema, is the issue of the relation between narrative and form. So, you know, when I did my lectures in Paris and New York about this subject of architecture and cinema, I started by showing 3 letters that my father was an architect, was formed at the Bauhaus in the Dessau, was a student of Mies van der Rohe, of Kandinsky, and so on. And I used to show 3 letters, 2 letters that he got from Mies van der Rohe. And then after Goebbels closed the Bauhaus very early in 1933, he was beaten, arrested, and he escaped to Basel. And he asked for his certificate of studies, and he got a letter from the bureaucrat, the new nominated Nazi bureaucrat, saying that we don't know of your existence, okay? Now, what I was interested that in the Mies van der Rohe letters, the letterhead is very beautiful. It's very minimalist, very carefully designed letters. And as you know, my dear, the Bauhaus decided not to use capital letters because they were socialist, and they decided that all letters will be equal. So even on this detail of design, it's a very beautiful piece. Maybe next time I can show you these letters. The letter he got from when he escaped to Basel in 1933 is, first of all, they say we don't know of your existence. Then the letter is written on kitsch, Gothic letters, so the form has changed. And then above the signature of this guy, it's written Heil Hitler. Okay, so you could see the very simple relations between form and narrative. And the fact, actually, if we think historically, that Goebbels closed the Bauhaus even before he closed some of the Marxist schools, it's because he understood that form is political. It means that the Nazis could not use the minimalist, beautiful form that of the Bauhaus, transparency, minimalism, a good sense of proportion. They needed a kitsch, bombastic, heroic kind of architecture, and that's why they needed to replace it by Speer, by very kind of Nazi, but also the Soviets use also Stalinist architecture, this kind of architecture which the human being is very tiny, very small. So architecture is a language, it's a syntax that you have to use the relation between form and narrative, like in cinema. So cinema, you also have the relations between form and narrative. It means that it's not enough to say good, let's say, enlightened statements in a reactionary form, but you have also to innovate the form. The form is part of what you are trying to do. You made reference to Anna Arabia, and you know that I criticize very often Michael Moore when he's using demagogic cinema to say things that politically I would agree with. So I would say, why do you need to use demagogic cinematic language in order to speak to us about things against the war and things that are completely reasonable. And when I see a film like that, the problem that I start to doubt even the argument, which I don't need to doubt because the arguments are correct. So there is a very strong tie in both mediums, in architecture and cinema, between the language that we use, the visual language that we use, and the message or the meaning or the narrative that we want to construct. Also, it's another issue which is also more about architecture, that architecture is not strictly a visual medium. It's also a medium which has to take care of human needs. It has to have a social dimension. So now architecture in the last, let's say, 30, 40 years, did a big virage into architecture which is strictly design-oriented. So we are very impressed by the stuff in Dubai, in the Louvre, all of that. And it lost the necessity to deal with very simple things which existed from the beginning of humanity, of the basic needs of people to have a space which is good, that the circulation is good, that there is light, that the proportions are good. So it's only dealing with the elements of representation. There is similar issues about cinema, that it's dealing too much with representation and not so much with the issue of the relationship between form and narrative. I suggest that you do what you suggested, that you show to the students Ana Arabia, and they can see that why did I do a film, and we had a nice conversation that you published. Why do we do 81 minutes shot without cuts?
Vasily Kandinsky, did he have any, this is just a question, did he have any influence in your work, on you?
I mean, not directly, but he was one of the committee who admitted my father to the Bauhaus, and I did a film called Lullaby to My Father, and I found notes that he wrote about when he admitted, he was in the commission who admitted him. And anyway, all this group, of Kandinsky, of the Blauer Reiter, the blue rider, which is Franz Marc, was killed in the First World War, but Kandinsky and others, they invented kind of juxtaposition, expressionist forms, and obviously that's something very interesting to dig into.
When I go back to my university, what advice can you give me as a cinematographic expert with this wonderful this architecture description that you've given? What advice can I give to my students to warn them and to advise them that the form of the media that they use is going to impact the story, the narrative that they tell, if that makes any sense?
Yeah, no, I agree with you completely. Otherwise, they will just use form in an eclectic way to aestheticize something. And I think the form has to be integral to the meaning of the project. And then there is another issue which we are, both medium, cinema and architecture, we're in trouble because the great architectural objects from the past that we know were constructed in an artisanal manner. It means that, let's say, if you take one of the greatest cathedrals in France, I did as maybe Mina told you, I did my diploma architect in Israel, and then I did master and PhD of architecture in Berkeley. And then when I collected all the academic stamps, I decided to do something else and decided to make movies. But I spent 9 years to study academically architecture. So to go back to what I was saying is that if you take one of the greatest cathedral, Gothic cathedral, the one of Chartres in France, okay, which is considered one of the greatest achievements of the Gothic period. So what do we know about Gothic period? We know that after the Romanesque period, where the roof of the building is leaning on the walls, so the technology has an impact both in architecture and cinema. Leaning on the walls, it means that you cannot have big windows. right? But when the Gothic period developed the idea of making arches, and that the roof doesn't lean on the wall per se, but on arches, then you had a big opening, and especially for North Europe, where you need to put light into the building. This was a big invention. And then they could also invented another art, which is the vitrage, that you can do drawings on the windows. But if we look at this cathedral, it was actually never drawn. There are no plans of it. Actually, what we consider that happened is that people went to the hillside in this little town Chartres with sticks and ropes, and they designed it on the real dimension of on the earth. You know, they put some sticks, put ropes, and this was the design of the cathedral. So what did it contribute? So let's imagine that they had a little hill. So basically in modernity, the architect would say, just take a bulldozer and get rid of this hill, but no. They just moved a bit the cathedral, so it has a very nice overview with relation of the site. Let's say that there was a beautiful tree. They didn't cut the tree. So the fact that we have a lot of facilities in our times to move hills, to cut trees, to do this, means that there is no process of adaptation of the architectural project to the site. And a lot of what we are talking now more and more, which is the environmental issues, are a product of this rigidity and negligence of necessity to adapt a building to an urban tissue. And I think it's the same about cinema. You know, we get in both mediums, let's say, the big exercise of architects and filmmakers is to take a text and to make a shape out of it. The architect will take, let's say, architect to design the place you are sitting, probably got to say, we need a classroom, we want it from wood, we want it to be connected by a corridor to some other rooms and so on. But it doesn't have a shape. And the architect has to translate this verbal material into form. Similar to cinema, that you have a scenario or a concept in a documentary, and you have to do a process of adaptation of the textual verbal material into shape. The problem is that in modernity, this process of adaptation that I explained about the cathedral does not exist anymore. Because the workers who will design the new building, they are not being consulted, they will execute the building. They don't have an option of interpreting it. And I use the term execute in a negative sense intentionally. You know? So basically they will just make the building. If there is a hill, they will cut the hill. If there is a tree, they will cut the tree. And also what filmmakers are now being demanded more and more by platforms and so on is to execute the scenario. But it's not a good idea, because sometimes when you make a movie, some ideas don't come only from us. They will come from a co-writer, they will come from an actor, they will come from a driver. You have to be integrating information which is coming elsewhere. And now in the mode of production, so it has both a material aspect, the mode of production, and conceptually what I try to speak about. People now, because we are in an age of there is very strong revisionist movement, so people try to say to us that Leni Riefenstahl was a great director. For me, she was not a great director. I mean, beyond Nazism and not the atrocities, she's not even a great director, because she basically is using what Speer is using in architecture. She's using scale. She's using a kind of heroic portrayal of the figure from down and so on. So it's very easy gadgets. And I'm not even speaking about the meaning of what she did. I think culturally the Nazis have produced nothing valuable in any form of art, not cinema, not music, no visual art. It's a authoritarian dictatorship culture which produced nothing of any value. And in addition to it, they even destroyed their own culture. They come from obviously Germanic culture, which did a major contribution to culture in any aspect, music, visual art, and so on.
Yes. And
They were like Stalinists, you know, when they destroyed the constructivist, very interesting, early 1917, this early period of Lisitsky and so on, when they destroyed everything, you know.